I was curled up on the couch after dinner, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, half watching some forgettable show on mute, when my husband walked into the living room with that expression again. That cold, detached look I'd come to recognize over the past few months. The one that never meant, "Can we talk?" It meant, "I've already decided, you're just being informed." He stopped a few feet away from me, arms crossed over his chest like a barrier, and said in this flat, businesslike tone, "I'm going on a trip next week." Not asked, not suggested, announced. I looked up from my phone, my thumb freezing over the screen. "A trip?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Where?" He barely blinked. "Some beach resort. People from the office are organizing it. We're leaving Friday morning, back the next Friday." An entire week, at a beach resort, with people from the office. My stomach tightened because I already knew exactly who people meant. For the past 6 months, one particular name had been stitched into almost every single story he brought home from work. Tessa. Tessa said something hilarious at lunch. Tessa thinks we should try that new place downtown. Tessa suggested a better approach for the project. Tessa recommended this great book. Tessa, Tessa, Tessa. Her name had slowly become a constant presence in our home, like a perfume that lingered long after the person left. And every time he said her name, I watched his face light up in a way it hadn't when he looked at me for a long time. So I asked the question I already knew the answer to. "Is Tessa going on this trip?" He didn't even hesitate. Not a flinch, not a pause. "Yeah, she actually organized the whole thing. Her and Natalie from accounting, plus a couple of other people from the department. 7 full days. My husband at a beach resort with the woman he'd been staying late at the office with, the woman whose text made him smile across the dinner table." I repeated it slowly, just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. "So, you're telling me, right now, that you're going on a week-long beach vacation with Tessa, and you're just informing me?" He rolled his eyes. Actually rolled his eyes at me like I was some jealous teenager instead of his wife of 7 years. "It's not like that," he said sharply. "We're colleagues, adults. Colleagues can take trips together without it turning into some dramatic situation." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I sat up straighter on the couch. "When did you plan all this?" He shrugged, casual to the point of cruelty. "A few weeks ago." A few weeks. So he'd known about this trip, talked about it at work, probably laughed about it with Tessa, maybe picked out that resort together online, and decided to tell me the week before he started packing. "You didn't think to mention it earlier?" I asked quietly. Or maybe ask if I was comfortable with it? That was when his entire expression changed. The fake patience dropped. The politeness evaporated. What replaced it was something colder, harder, like I'd just inconvenienced him in his own house. "I'm not asking for permission," he said, every word clipped. "I'm going, if you don't like my choices." He held my gaze, eyes flat. "Then you should get a divorce." Just like that. No hesitation, no attempt to soften the blow. He tossed our entire marriage onto the table like a card he'd been planning to play for months. He fully expected me to panic, to back down, to say, no, I'm sorry, I overreacted. Instead, something inside me went very, very still. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized this wasn't some sudden change. The distance, the late nights, the phone turned away from me, the way he'd stopped seeing me and started talking about Tessa like she was the sun in his sky. This had been building for months, and I'd been the one making excuses for it. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I just nodded slowly and said, "Got it." His eyebrows lifted, surprised. "That's it? No big dramatic reaction?" "No," I said softly. "You made yourself perfectly clear." He stared at me for another moment, then shrugged and turned toward the bedroom. "Good. I'm packing tonight. My flight's early." I listened to the sound of the closet doors sliding open, the suitcase wheels scraping against the floor, his humming drifting down the hallway like he didn't have a single care in the world. Like he hadn't just told his wife to divorce him if she didn't like him spending a week at the beach with another woman. My phone was still in my hand, but I wasn't scrolling anymore. I was thinking and planning. He wanted to make unilateral decisions about our marriage without my input. Fine. 2 people could play that game. And in the morning, when he walked out the door with his suitcase and that new excitement in his eyes, I already knew exactly what I was going to do the moment his car left the driveway. If you had met us a year ago, you never would have guessed we'd end up here. Divorce papers on a kitchen table. My husband telling me, "If you don't like it, get a divorce." 7 years earlier, I was just a tired woman in her late 20s, sharing a tiny apartment with a leaky faucet and a loud neighbor who loved karaoke at 2 a.m. I was 29 when I met him. I worked as a project coordinator for a mid-sized marketing agency. Too much responsibility for not enough pay, permanently attached to my laptop, and a bottomless cup of coffee. He was 31, newly transferred to our city to work in finance. We met at a friend's birthday dinner. I remember the first time I saw him. Dark blue shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms, laughing with the kind of ease I have never been able to fake. I was at the far end of the table, composing a polite smile, thinking about deadlines instead of dessert, when he slid into the empty seat beside me. "Hi," he'd said, offering his hand. "I'm Daniel. Apparently I'm the new guy everyone keeps mentioning." I'd shaken his hand, feeling oddly aware of how warm his palm was against mine. "I'm the always tired one everyone keeps mentioning," I'd replied. He laughed, really laughed. It made me look at him properly. By the end of the night, he'd memorized my coffee order, teased me about the way I made lists for everything, and walked me to my car, standing there in the parking lot telling me about how he'd moved here for a promotion and didn't know many people yet. "Maybe we can fix that," I'd said, unlocking my car. "Some of us exist outside of our emails on good days." He smiled, that soft, focused smile he used to save just for me. "Then maybe we should get coffee sometime, off the clock." Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into weekends together. Within a year, we were sharing more than a Netflix password. 2 years before the wedding, I bought a small house on the edge of town. 3 bedrooms, creaky floors, an overgrown backyard, and a kitchen that desperately needed updating. I signed the papers with my hands shaking, using the savings I'd built up over years of saying no to vacations and yes to overtime. When I showed him the keys, he'd picked me up and spun me in a slow circle right there in the empty living room. "You did this," he said, eyes bright, "on your own." "I'm not dragging you into my mortgage," I'd joked. "You can run while you still have the chance." "I'm exactly where I want to be," he'd told me, and at the time, I believed him. He moved in after we got married. We'd stood in that same living room, furniture finally in place, boxes half unpacked, and he'd wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, chin resting on my shoulder. "Our home," he'd said. I never corrected him out loud. On paper, it was my house, bought in my name, paid for with my money, but I wanted it to be ours. Back then, everything felt like a team effort. He covered some bills, I covered others. We split groceries, utilities, small repairs. His mother, Lorraine, never quite approved of me. She'd grown up in a world where a good wife stayed at home, relied on her husband, and made sure dinner was on the table every night by 6. Instead, her son had married me, a woman who owned her house, worked long hours, and sometimes fed him takeout straight from the box while still answering emails at 9 p.m. At family dinners, she'd smile with her lips, not her eyes. "Still working full-time?" she'd ask like it was a phase. "Yes," I'd say, forcing a pleasant tone. "Deadlines don't respect traditional values." Daniel would chuckle and squeeze my knee under the table, like we were in this together. Back then, he always took my side. The first few years were simple in the way you only recognize as simple after everything falls apart. Movie nights on the couch, Sunday mornings sleeping in, arguing over paint colors for the guest room. We talked about the future in that vague, hopeful way couples do. "Maybe kids in a few years," he'd say, brushing my hair away from my face as we lay in bed. "Maybe," I'd answer. "When we're ready. When life slows down a little." Life never really slowed down, but we learned to live inside the rush. If there were red flags in those early years, they were small enough to fold and tuck into my pocket. Little things, easily dismissed. The way he sometimes needed to be the center of attention in every room. How his mood lifted around praise and deflated around criticism. His tendency to avoid hard conversations by cracking a joke or changing the subject. I told myself everyone had flaws, that love meant choosing which ones you could live with. When he started his new job at the company where he'd eventually meet Tessa, we celebrated with cheap champagne in the kitchen, the bubbles tickling my nose as he kissed me. "This is a big step," I'd said, leaning against the counter. "New office, new people, new responsibilities." "New stress," he'd added, but he was smiling. "But it'll be worth it. Better pay, better opportunities." I'd nodded, feeling proud of him, proud of us. I had no idea that new people included a woman whose name would one day sit in the center of every fight we tried not to have. I remember the first time he mentioned her. So casual, so harmless. "There's a new analyst in the department," he'd said over dinner. "Tessa, she actually knows what she's doing, which is rare around there." I'd laughed, stabbing a piece of pasta with my fork. Poor thing, surviving that circus on her first week. He smirked. She'll be fine. She's sharp. Just one word, sharp. I didn't know then that her name would slowly replace mine in his stories. All I knew was that I was married to a man I loved, living in a house I'd worked my whole adult life to buy, and trying to balance my career, our marriage, and the version of myself I still wanted to become. I didn't realize that somewhere along the line he'd start looking at someone else the way he used to look at me. Not yet. Back then, I was still the woman who believed that if you loved someone and worked hard enough, your marriage was safe. I hadn't learned yet that sometimes the person who breaks your heart is the one who looks you in the eye and says, "If you don't like my choices, then you should get a divorce." If you'd asked me when things really started to change, I would have told you it happened slowly. So slowly, I didn't realize the ground beneath our marriage was shifting until the foundation was already cracking. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. Quiet, subtle at first, then louder, sharper, impossible to ignore. But at the time, I kept telling myself, he's just stressed. It's work. It's a phase. Because that was easier than admitting something deeper, darker, was happening right in front of me. The first shift started with the way he said her name. "Tessa had an idea today that totally saved the project," he said one Tuesday evening, loading the dishwasher like he expected applause for it. "Honestly, the girl's a genius." I smiled, because that's what supportive wives do. "That's great," I answered. "I'm glad she's helping lighten the workload." "Yeah," he said, eyes bright. "She really gets it. She just thinks differently." I remember thinking how warm he looked saying her name, like he'd swallowed sunlight. I brushed it off. Everyone has coworkers they admire. Still, the next day he brought her up again. And again, the day after that. At first it was funny stories. Then it was inside jokes I didn't understand. Then it was comparisons, subtle ones I pretended not to notice. "Tessa always double-checks these reports. I wish more people worked that meticulously." "Tessa's great with efficiency. You'd like her." "Tessa said something hilarious today. Oh my God, she cracks me up." He talked about her the way he used to talk about us. That was the first seed. The second came when he suddenly started caring about his appearance more than usual. My husband was never sloppy, but he wasn't the type to iron his shirts or restyle his hair after work. He wore clean clothes, brushed his hair, done. So imagine my surprise when I came into the bathroom one morning and found him using my expensive hair clay, the one he used to tease me about for costing more than the grocery store version. He glanced at me in the mirror and said lightly, "Just figured I'd try something new. Gotta look sharp at the office." He'd never said sharp before. He left smelling like cologne he hadn't worn since we were dating. And stupid me, I smiled like it was a good sign. Like maybe he was trying for me. But he didn't call me at lunch like he used to. He didn't text me during breaks. He didn't even mention me in the string of daily stories he brought home from work. Only Tessa. By month 2, the changes were no longer subtle. He started staying late at work, at first once a week, then twice. Soon it was nearly every other night. "Just crunch time," he told me, slipping his shoes on at 7 p.m. "Quarterly reports. You know how it is." "Do you want me to pack you dinner?" I asked softly. He waved me off. No. Tessa and I will probably just order something in. Easier that way." For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. "Tessa is staying late too?" "Yeah," he said, not noticing the shift in my voice. "We're working on the same project." "We." That word echoed in my bones long after he closed the door. The house felt bigger without him, quieter, hollow in a way that made my chest ache. That was the second seed. The third came the night I caught the expression he didn't want me to see. We were making dinner together, a rare occurrence those days. I was chopping vegetables. He was checking his phone. The screen lit up, and I caught the look on his face. A smile. Not just any smile, the kind a person makes when they feel seen, wanted, special. I didn't ask who it was, I already knew. He flipped the phone over quickly, too quickly, and forced a casual tone. "Just work stuff." But work stuff didn't usually text at 9:45 p.m. It stung, but I wasn't ready to admit why. Instead, I swallowed the hurt, went back to chopping onions, letting the sting in my eyes disguise the sting in my heart. Month 3 brought the shift in our weekends. We used to spend Saturdays at the farmer's market or binge-watching shows in bed, but suddenly, he had errands, he had team outings, he had work socials, he had just grabbing a drink with the group. Funny how the group never included names I recognized. Funny how the group seemed to shrink into one person. Me, I stayed home, telling myself this was adulthood, busy seasons, stressful jobs, temporary distance. But deep down, the truth whispered, you are no longer his first choice. This marriage is no longer his first home. I tried talking to him one night. We were in bed, backs nearly touching, but not quite. The silence between us felt heavy, cold, unfamiliar. Are you happy? I asked quietly. He let out a soft laugh, dismissive and irritated. What kind of question is that? A real one, I said, trying to steady my breathing. Are you happy with us? He sat up, rubbing his forehead as if my question inconvenienced him. You've been so dramatic lately, he said. Everything's fine. But he didn't look at me, didn't touch me, didn't reassure me the way he used to. And when he lay back down, the space between us felt wider than it had ever been. That night, I stared at the ceiling long after his breathing grew steady with sleep. I told myself every couple goes through phases. I told myself we'd find our way back. I didn't know then that he was already drifting towards someone else. Or maybe he'd already reached her. By month 4, the tension had turned into something sharp and constant, like walking barefoot on broken glass. He was distant, cold, easily annoyed. And every time I reached for him emotionally, he took one step further away. The night I finally asked about Tessa directly, he didn't even blink. She's a coworker, he said flatly. You're overthinking, again. But his tone held something new. Impatience. Contempt. Like my feelings were an inconvenience he didn't have time for. Like I was asking too much by wanting the man I married to still want me back. That was when I realized something ugly and painful. I was fighting for a marriage he'd already stopped participating in. He just hadn't told me yet. I didn't know then that things were about to escalate far beyond cold shoulders and late nights. I didn't know he would soon announce a week-long trip with the woman who had slowly replaced me in his life, or that he would look me in the eye and tell me, if you don't like my choices, then you should get a divorce. The seeds of conflict had been planted. They were blooming now into something poisonous, and I had started to understand. I wasn't losing him. He was already gone. It was a Thursday evening. The kind of quiet, ordinary night that should have meant nothing. I'd made dinner. He came home late. I'd kept his plate warm in the oven, like I always did, even though he seldom thanked me anymore. He walked in smelling like unfamiliar cologne, not the one he used to wear when we were first dating, not the one I bought him for our anniversary. Something sharper, muskier, not his. He didn't notice the way I stiffened. Or maybe he did, and just didn't care. He dropped his keys on the counter, loosened his tie, and said casually, by the way, I'm going on a trip next week. Just like that. No lead-up, no context, no consideration. I was still wiping my hands on a dish towel when I turned toward him. A trip? I repeated, keeping my voice steady. What kind of trip? He shrugged, like we were discussing weather. Beach resort, work people, leaving Friday morning. I blinked. Which Friday? Next one. I froze. That's a week away. He opened the fridge, scanning for leftovers. I'll be back Friday after. An entire week, at a beach, with people from work. Every instinct I had, the ones I'd been trying to silence for months, started screaming. I swallowed hard. Okay, and who exactly is going? He didn't even pause. Tessa organized it. She and Natalie, and maybe a couple others. My lungs felt tight, like the air in the room had suddenly gone thin. Tessa, I repeated softly, letting the name hang between us. He glanced at me for the first time, the barest flicker of annoyance crossing his face. Yeah. Why? I stared at him, really stared at him, his loosened tie, his tired eyes, the way he didn't bother pretending anymore. Are you seriously telling me, I said slowly, carefully, that you're going on a week-long beach vacation with Tessa, and this is the first time I'm hearing about it? He rolled his eyes, actually rolled his eyes like I was insane for asking. It's not like that, and he snapped. We're coworkers, adults. We can take trips together without you making it into some melodramatic thing. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. So you planned this weeks ago? I asked. Yeah. He said it so casually it felt like a slap. And it didn't occur to you to tell me sooner? His expression changed in an instant. The irritation hardened. The warmth that used to live in his eyes had vanished months ago, but now something colder took its place. He crossed his arms. I'm not asking permission, he said slowly, as if explaining something to a child. I'm going. And if you don't like my choices... He held my gaze. His next words landed like a knife slipping between ribs. You should get a divorce. Silence. I felt the world shift under my feet. A deep, sickening clarity settled over me. He wasn't reacting out of anger. He wasn't flustered or emotional. He was calm, measured, almost rehearsed. Like he'd been waiting for an excuse to say the words. Like he wanted me to back down or break. But I didn't do either. Instead, something inside me, something soft, something exhausted, finally snapped clean in half. I nodded once. I got it. He blinked, thrown off for a flicker of a moment. "That's it?" he asked. "No big dramatic reaction?" "No," I said quietly. "You made yourself clear." He expected tears. He expected anger. He expected me to beg. But all I felt was empty, utterly empty. He shook off the tension, satisfied by what he thought was my obedience. "Good," he muttered. "I'm packing tonight." He walked past me toward the bedroom, suitcase wheels scratching against hardwood as he pulled it out from under the bed. He hummed as he packed. Hummed. I stood there, fingers gripping the edge of the countertop, trying to steady my breathing. That was the moment my marriage ended. Not the week-long trip, not the late nights, not the perfume on his shirt or the texts he hid. It ended the moment he told me my feelings mattered less than his convenience, that his choices were unquestionable, that I could either accept being a placeholder or remove myself. He had no idea which one I'd choose. The next morning, he woke up early. Earlier than usual. He showered, shaved, styled his hair, more effort than he'd put in for me in months. When he walked out in a brand new shirt I'd never seen before, I realized he'd probably bought it for the trip. Maybe with her, maybe because of her. He grabbed his suitcase by the door. "I'll text you when I land," he said, eyes glued to his phone. "Probably texting her." I nodded. "Have fun." He looked up then, suspicion flickering across his face at my tone. But I kept my expression neutral, pleasant, unbothered. "Yeah," he said, giving a short nod. "I will." He left without looking back. I stood by the window and watched him load his suitcase into the trunk. He checked his reflection in the car window, smiling at himself, smiling at the man he was becoming, smiling at the woman he thought was waiting for him on the other end of that flight. And when he drove away, turning the corner without hesitation, without a pause, without a second glance, I picked up my phone, opened the browser, typed the words, "Divorce attorneys near me." It wasn't reactionary, it wasn't emotional, it wasn't a threat. It was clarity. It was the first real decision I'd made for myself in months. He told me to divorce him if I didn't like his choices, so I was going to take his advice. For the first time in half a year, I actually felt something returning to my body. Not fear, not grief, power. And I would need every bit of it for what came next. The silence in the house after he left was unsettling at first. Too still, too calm, like the air was holding its breath along with me. For months, I'd been living in constant emotional noise, the late-night phone vibrations, the tension in his voice when he said he was working late, the way he'd sigh dramatically whenever I asked a simple question like, "What time will you be home?" Or, "Do you want dinner?" But with him gone, the noise disappeared, and what replaced it was something unexpected. Clarity. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after he drove off, hands flat on the cool marble counter, staring at the spot where he'd said the words that broke us. "If you don't like my choices, then you should get a divorce." It repeated in my mind like a looped recording. He hadn't said it out of anger, not truly. There was no heat in his voice, no wounded pride, no frustration. It was casual, dismissive, like tossing a crumpled receipt into the trash. That was what hurt most. Not the words themselves, but how easily he said them. How little our 7-year marriage seemed to weigh on his conscience. I remember whispering to myself, was I really that easy to walk away from? The question hung heavy in the quiet room. And then slowly another realization formed, one that hurt even more. I had been walking away from myself long before he walked away from me. I had been shrinking for months, bending myself around his coldness, avoiding conflict, pretending not to see what was right in front of me because the truth felt too heavy to carry. I had let myself become a supporting character in my own life. Not anymore. I made coffee, strong, black, scalding, maybe out of habit, maybe out of defiance. As it brewed, I opened my laptop and typed the attorney's office address into my notes. My fingers shook, not out of fear, but adrenaline. Something electric was buzzing under my skin. When the phone consultation started later that morning, my voice surprised me. It didn't crack. It didn't tremble. It was steady, controlled, calmer than I felt. 7 years married, I told the attorney. House in my name only, no children. Separate cars, one shared checking account. I believe he's having an affair. There was a small pause on the other end. Then his voice came through, crisp and professional. This will be straightforward. Straightforward. The word hit me like someone had finally turned a light on in a dim room. I wasn't trapped. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't clinging to something that couldn't be salvaged. I was simply facing a truth I had avoided long enough. When the attorney asked for grounds, I hesitated for the briefest moment. And then I forced myself to say it out loud. He is emotionally involved with a coworker, and he told me to get a divorce if I didn't like him taking a week-long trip with her. Silence. Then the attorney asked quietly, "He said that verbatim?" "Yes." Then we moved quickly. After the call, I sat on the edge of the couch, the same couch where he'd told me he was going on that trip like it was no big deal. My chest felt tight, but not the way it used to. Not with dread, not with fear, but something new. Resolve. Still, even with determination buzzing beneath my skin, the emotions came in waves. The first wave was anger. Not fiery rage. No, it was deeper, heavier. A cold, steady anger at myself for ignoring every red flag, every shift in tone, every late night at the office that didn't make sense. The second wave was grief. Not for him, not even for the marriage, but for the woman I used to be, the one who believed that love and loyalty always won over temptation and selfishness. The third wave was relief. Relief that the uncertainty was over. Relief that I was done guessing, done hoping, done hurting in silence. Relief that I no longer had to rationalize his choices or explain to myself why the man who promised to love me had stopped trying. The first confrontation happened in my mind long before I said anything out loud. I pictured him walking through the door next Friday, tan skin glowing from a week of sunshine, suitcase rolling behind him, smelling like ocean breeze, and maybe her perfume. And I imagined myself waiting. Not with tears, not with questions, not with accusations, but with papers. Final, cold, undeniable. The image steadied me in a way I didn't expect. It felt like taking back something I'd lost. My voice, my boundaries, my worth. Later that evening, Jordan called, one of the few friends who actually noticed when the dynamic in our marriage shifted. "Hey," he said, tone cautious. "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" I hesitated. The truth was too raw to say out loud yet. Too fresh. "I'm fine," I said. He didn't buy it. He never did. "Come on. Your husband is gone for a week at a beach resort with a coworker he won't shut up about, and you're fine? Really?" I closed my eyes. He always cut straight through the noise. "I'm handling it," I said softly. "Handling it how?" "When there's something to tell, I'll tell you." He sighed but didn't push further. "All right, whatever you need, I'm here." I swallowed hard because a few months ago, I would have said, "Thank you. We're just in a rough patch." But that version of me wasn't here anymore. This version of me had already decided the marriage was over the minute he told me to divorce him. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the empty bed, my bed in my house, and stared at the ceiling, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet. I wasn't imagining scenarios. I wasn't replaying old memories. I was planning, plotting each step I'd take before he returned, how I would separate his belongings, which documents I needed to gather, where I would place the divorce papers so he saw them before he even set his suitcase down. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, a strange sense of calm settled over me. Not happiness, not satisfaction. Just the certainty that I was doing what I should have done months ago. The moment he began giving pieces of himself to someone else, I whispered to the darkness, "This ends with me walking away with my dignity." And for the first time in a very long time, I believed it. The days leading up to his return felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, not afraid, but finally aware of the height. Every hour, every small task, every quiet moment in the house seemed to sharpen my senses rather than weaken them. This wasn't panic, this wasn't desperation, this was awakening. By Monday, I'd already met with my attorney in person. By Tuesday, the papers were drafted. By Thursday, everything was ready to be filed. And by Friday, the day his flight landed, I had done the one thing he never expected from me. I prepared for his absence instead of mourning it. My house, the one I bought 2 years before our marriage, had never felt more solid beneath my feet. As I began separating our belongings, something shifted inside me. I thought it would hurt, that touching his clothes or moving his books would make my heart sink. But the opposite happened. Each item I placed in a box felt like pulling a splinter from my skin. Small sting, followed by relief. I folded his shirts with the same care I'd once used out of love, but now the intention was different. Not love, not spite. Closure. I gathered everything that belonged to him. His grooming products, his favorite coffee mug, his watch boxes, his stacks of office notebooks. 6 boxes in total, labeled neatly, placed in the guest bedroom where he'd see them instantly. The house looked different afterward, lighter, like opening a window after months of stale air. It made me realize something painful. Removing his presence made the house feel more like a home than when he lived in it. On Wednesday night, my phone rang. Jordan. He knew, maybe instinctively, that something was unraveling beneath the surface. "How are you?" he asked. "Fine." "Bullshit." I exhaled. Jordan always saw through the cracks. He pushed further. "My wife goes on a trip with another guy? I'd be losing my damn mind. You're not fine." I let a long silence stretch between us before replying. "I'm handling it." He didn't understand what handling it meant. Not yet. But he would. Thursday night, 8 p.m. My phone lit up with his name. The first message all week that wasn't a generic "landed safe" or "weather's nice." This time he wrote, "I can't wait to be home tomorrow. I miss you." I stared at the message. A week of silence. A week of sunshine with another woman. A week of choices he made without me. And now he missed me? Maybe another version of me, the woman from 6 months ago, the one still clinging to hope, would have melted at those words. But not this version. This version saw the message for what it was. Not love, not remorse, but fear. Fear of coming home and realizing reality didn't pause while he chased excitement. Fear that I might have changed while he assumed I'd wait frozen in place. I didn't reply. He needed to come home, not knowing what waited for him. Friday. I woke before sunrise, made coffee, showered, dressed with deliberate calm. The divorce papers sat inside a manila envelope on the kitchen table, centered, unmistakable, waiting like a loaded truth. At 2:47 p.m., I heard his car pull into the driveway. The moment I'd been preparing for all week. My pulse quickened, but my hands remained steady. I closed my laptop and stood, moving to a spot where I could see the front door clearly. Keys jingled. The lock turned. He walked in. My God. He looked happy, refreshed, tanned, smiling like a man who'd just stepped out of a dream vacation instead of a marriage he'd neglected. He dropped his suitcase by the door, humming as he kicked off his shoes. He didn't even look at me. Not at first. He headed straight to the fridge, grabbed leftovers, and began eating them cold, leaning against the counter like he lived alone. Then, finally, he glanced my way. "You're quiet. What, no welcome home?" I gave him a soft smile, one he didn't recognize anymore. "Welcome home," I said calmly. "How was the trip?" He brightened even more. That same brightness I'd seen every time he talked about her. "It was amazing. Resort was gorgeous. Weather perfect. We had such a good time." We. Not I. We. My heart didn't crack. It didn't crumble. It went silent. He shoved another bite of food into his mouth. "By the way," he said casually, "I've been thinking about what I said before I left." My spine straightened. "The divorce thing," he continued. "I meant it. If you're going to keep trying to control me, then maybe we really should reconsider this whole marriage." He said it the way someone might comment on a TV show. So casual, it felt surreal. I nodded slowly. "You're right," I said softly. "We should reconsider things." He laughed nervously. "Okay, so what does that mean?" I gestured toward the kitchen table. He turned, saw the envelope, froze. What's that?" "Why don't you open it?" I said gently. He did. And the moment he saw the words "petition for dissolution of marriage," the color drained from his face. His tan vanished. His confidence cracked. The fork slipped from his hand and clattered onto the counter. "What is this?" he whispered. "Divorce papers," I said quietly. "Exactly like you suggested." His hand shook as he flipped through the pages. "You filed? You actually filed?" "Yes, on Tuesday." Tuesday? I'd been gone 4 days." "Yes." "Why didn't you talk to me first?" "You told me to get a divorce," I said simply. "So I did." His mouth opened, then closed. Panic spread across his expression. He finally understood. He wasn't the one in control anymore. This wasn't a threat. This wasn't a fight. This wasn't emotional manipulation. This was happening. He made the choice. I carried it out. What came next? The begging, the anger, the involvement of his mother, the unraveling of his entire narrative would drag everything into full chaos. This was just the beginning. And for the first time in months, the chaos didn't scare me. It empowered me. Because truth has a way of collapsing every lie it touches. And he was about to learn exactly how much truth I'd been holding back. I always thought the worst moment of my marriage would be the day he finally admitted he didn't love me anymore. But that's not what happened. The worst moment wasn't when he rolled his eyes and told me to get a divorce. It wasn't even when he walked out the door with a suitcase packed for another woman. The worst moment was watching the man I once trusted with my entire heart stare at divorce papers like they were a weapon I had finally learned to aim. And instead of taking responsibility, he panicked. He blamed. He begged. He manipulated. He called reinforcements. He twisted the narrative until I barely recognized the person standing across from me. "This isn't real," he whispered, still staring at the papers. "You wouldn't actually do this. You're angry. You're overreacting." I was standing right in front of him, yet he spoke as if I weren't there at all. "I already did," I said quietly. "It's filed." "You filed?" He looked physically pained by the word. "Yes, on Tuesday. Without even talking to me, without giving me a chance." I laughed, but there was no humor left in me. "You told me to get a divorce if I didn't like your choices," I said. "Why would I argue with you?" His head snapped up, eyes wide with something between confusion and fear. "You took me seriously?" "Yes." "You're insane." "No," I said, voice steady. "I'm done." The denial cracked, and anger surged out of him like wildfire. "You packed my things?" he shouted as he stormed into the guest room. The sound of him ripping open the boxes echoed down the hallway, cardboard tearing under his hands. "You had no right to touch my stuff." "They're your things," I replied calmly. "You'll need them when you leave." "Leave?" He looked wild. "This is my house too." "No," I said softly. "It isn't." His face turned red. "We're married. That means—" "It means nothing legally," I cut in. "I bought this house before I met you. Your name isn't on the deed, the mortgage, or the tax records. You've never contributed financially. My attorney confirmed. I can ask you to leave at any time." He stared at me like I'd slapped him across the face. "You're kicking me out." "I'm telling you the truth." "And if I don't go?" he challenged. "Then the police will remove you tomorrow morning." His bravado faltered. For the first time, he truly saw the reality. I wasn't making empty threats. He grabbed his phone with shaking hands. "No," I said, already knowing who he was calling. "Don't. This is between us." He ignored me. And seconds later, I heard his mother's shrill voice on the other end. "What did she do?" I stepped away, letting him explain the story however he wanted. I knew she'd take his side regardless. Within 20 minutes, I heard her car screech into our driveway. When she burst through the door, she looked at me with pure venom. What kind of woman blindsides her husband like this? My husband immediately latched onto her arm, crying now. "She packed my things. She filed while I was on a work trip. She's kicking me out." "Work trip? Right." "Lorraine," I said evenly, "your son told me to divorce him if I didn't like him taking a week-long beach vacation with another woman." "She is not another woman," his mother snapped. "She is a coworker. You're insecure. That's the problem." I felt something inside me splinter, not break, but harden. "Insecure?" I repeated. He spent months telling me stories about Tessa, months staying out late with her. He smelled like her perfume when he came home. He hid messages from her. He took a week-long trip with her without discussing it with me. His mother crossed her arms. "You should have trusted him." "I did," I said quietly. "He stopped trusting himself." She glared at me with disgust. "Marriage is about forgiveness. You don't throw 7 years away over something you imagined." "I didn't imagine anything," I said firmly. "He told me to get a divorce, so I did." My husband finally snapped, shouting, "I didn't mean it. People say things when they're upset." "You weren't upset," I replied. "You were bored." Silence engulfed the room. Lorraine dragged him into the guest room to gather the rest of his things. I stayed in the living room, scrolling through my phone with mechanical calm, while listening to the muffled sound of boxes being slammed, things being thrown into bags, hurried whisper fights between mother and son. The emotional distance was surreal. I felt like I was floating above the scene, detached from it all. At one point, he came back into the room, eyes red, face crumpled. "You're really doing this," he whispered. "I already did," I said. "You're heartless." "I've been heartbroken for months," I corrected. "There's a difference." He stared at me, searching for something. Old softness, old forgiveness, old versions of me he thought he still owned. But she was gone. When he walked out to the car with the last box, Lorraine wrapped her arm around his shoulders like he was a grieving widower instead of the cause of his own downfall. He turned one last time, eyes shining with a desperate, breaking sort of pain. "I hope you know," he said shakily, "you're making the biggest mistake of your life." I held his gaze steadily. "I'm correcting one." His jaw clenched, his eyes hardened. "You're going to regret this." I smiled softly. "No," I whispered, "you will." He got into the car, slammed the door, and Lorraine drove them away in a fury of headlights and tires screeching on the pavement. I stood at the window and watched them disappear around the corner. The man I married and the woman who raised him both fleeing the consequences they created. And in the stillness that followed, the first tear slid down my cheek. Not because I wanted him back, but because no one tells you that taking your power back comes with grief for the version of yourself who didn't know how to use it sooner. That was my darkest moment. Standing alone in a silent house, breathing through the ache of closing a chapter that should have ended long before this night. But darkness, I would soon learn, is only the space right before the dawn begins. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was heartbroken, but because my mind was finally awake after months of being numbed by confusion, hope, and denial. The house was silent. No footsteps, no sighs, no second toothbrush beside mine, no half-empty coffee mug he always left on the table. Just stillness, and me, the version of me that didn't need permission anymore. After Lorraine drove him away, I thought I'd get a few hours of peace. I didn't. My phone buzzed relentlessly. First call, he didn't leave a message. Second call, same. Third, a shaky breath, then silence. Fourth, please pick up. I didn't. Fifth, he snapped, why are you being so stubborn? Stubborn. It almost made me laugh. The irony was too rich. I let all 5 calls go to voicemail. Then 6. Then 7. By the 10th call, I finally answered, not out of sympathy, but because I wanted to hear how far his narrative had cracked. What do you want? I said in a calm voice he clearly didn't expect. He exhaled a tremor. Can we talk? Please. This is getting out of hand. This is the conversation, I replied. What do you want to say? There was a beat of silence. I made a mistake, he said finally. Which one? I asked. There are several. He ignored the jab. I shouldn't have gone on the trip. I shouldn't have said what I said. I shouldn't have... His voice wavered. Just, let's talk in person. Please, let me come over. No. Why not? Because the locks were changed, I said simply. I could practically hear his breath hitch. You changed the locks on me? I just left a few hours ago. You no longer live here, I said. You left with your belongings. You were served. It's done. This is insane, he snapped. We've been married 7 years. Yes, I said. 7 years. And you gave 6 months of those to someone else. He went quiet. Then softer. Nothing happened with Tessa. A lie so worn out it practically crumbled between us. I don't care anymore, I said truthfully. He wasn't expecting that. What do you mean you don't care? I mean it's irrelevant. This marriage is over not because you cheated, but because you stopped being my husband long before you left for that trip. Silence. Heavy. Full of every truth he never wanted to face. He tried again. I love you. No, I said gently. You love having someone who loves you. That's not the same. His breath shook. What do you want from me? An apology? Fine, I'm sorry. You're not sorry, I replied. You're scared. He didn't deny it. So I hung up. And then, for the first time since everything began, I turned off my phone entirely. Not out of anger, not to punish him, but because I no longer needed to hear the voice of a man who only valued me once I stopped valuing him. I woke up to 17 missed calls, 12 messages, and a brightness in my chest I didn't recognize at first. Freedom. By noon, my attorney emailed me. Rebecca Oliver, attorney for respondent, request negotiation. Of course she did. But I wasn't negotiating anything. Not my house, not my peace, not my dignity. The settlement was simple because I had made my boundaries simple. Still, I wondered what story he was telling his lawyer. Probably that I was irrational, emotional, overreacting. Funny how men rewrite history when accountability enters the room. Friday, grocery store, frozen aisle. And there she was, Natalie, the co-worker who was supposedly on the trip with them, the one whose name he used to pad the truth, to make it sound like a group event instead of a getaway for 2. She saw me before I saw her. Her face flushed instantly, and she tried to walk away quickly. Guilt always moves fast. Natalie, I said, stepping forward. She froze. Can I ask you something? I said. She swallowed hard. I don't think I should be talking about this. That's a no, I said. She closed her eyes for a second, then whispered. I didn't go. I was supposed to. Something came up. Meaning the trip was exactly what I feared. Just him and Tessa. Was it only the 2 of them? I asked. She hesitated. I think so. You think? I echoed. Or you know? Her shoulders slumped. I know. There it was. The truth. Not hidden, not manipulated, not softened by excuses. And then, as if fate wanted to twist the knife with poetic precision, she added one more thing. They're not together anymore. I blinked. What do you mean? Trevor, she caught herself. Sorry, Dan. He ended things a few days ago. Told her it wasn't what he thought it would be. I felt absolutely nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, no thrill. Just emptiness. Natalie bit her lip, voice lowering. She thought she could have him. She really did. I warned her. But your husband... She shook her head. He just wanted attention, and she was convenient. Convenient. A word so painful, so revealing, it felt like being punched and hugged at the same time. "Thank you," I said quietly. She touched my arm gently. "You're doing the right thing," she whispered. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." But I wasn't sorry. Not anymore. Because right there, in the frozen aisle, beside stacks of ice cream and microwave dinners, I realized the truth that finally set me free. He wasn't worth the grief I'd given him, not even a fraction of it. He didn't leave me for her. He left our marriage because he wanted someone who made him feel big, wanted, desired. Not because she was special, but because she wasn't me. Because I knew him, all of him. And attention is sweeter when it comes from someone who doesn't see your flaws. He wanted to feel like a prize again. She made him feel shiny, until she didn't. And then he realized too late that the one person who ever truly loved him was the same woman he told to divorce him. That's when everything shifted. Not in my marriage, that was already dead, but in me. I walked out of that grocery store taller, lighter, and with the quiet, profound knowledge that I wasn't the one losing anything. He was, and the fallout waiting for him would be his alone to bear, because I was done caring anything for him ever again. There's a moment after a storm, the sky still bruised, the air thick with the scent of earth, when everything feels strangely quiet, almost gentle, almost peaceful. But that calm is never real. It's the world catching its breath before revealing what's left standing. That's exactly what the weeks after he moved out felt like. A quiet pause before the consequences finally arrived and found him. The morning after our confrontation, I woke to 17 missed calls and 12 messages. Some pleading, "We can fix this, talk to me, I miss you." Some defensive, "You're overreacting, we're not done." And one, sent at 2 a.m., that revealed the truth beneath all his panic. "You're going to regret pushing me away. I have rights too." Rights. Not love, not remorse. Claim. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted all of them. Then I blocked his number. Not out of bitterness, not out of pettiness, but because when someone shows you what you mean to them, you listen. The first time I went back to work, I felt different. Lighter, more grounded. Almost like I'd been carrying a massive weight so long that I'd forgotten how tall I really stood. Jordan stopped by my desk, eyes wide. "You look good," he said. "Like you slept well for the first time in months." I gave a small smile. I did. He pulled up a chair. "All right, what happened? And don't give me that 'I'm handling it' crap." So I told him the truth. Not everything, but enough. I filed for divorce. He froze, blinking, processing. "Holy shit," he whispered. "When?" "Last week. He, since in this version we swapped the genders, got served Friday." Jordan leaned back, exhaling. "Good," he said softly. "Good for you. Honestly, I was waiting for the moment you'd finally see what the rest of us saw." "The rest of you?" I echoed. He raised a brow. "Come on. Everyone could tell something was wrong. You kept shrinking while he kept acting like the sun rose for him alone." The honesty stung, but it didn't hurt, because it was true. That afternoon, my attorney, Pierce, called me. "She's hired an attorney," he said. "Of course she did." "She is requesting compensation for the marriage," Pierce continued. I blinked. "Compensation for what?" "For existing, I suppose," he said dryly. "Her attorney claims she earned emotional equity by living in your home." I actually laughed. "She lived here rent-free." He chuckled. "Yes, and as her attorney has now realized, the law does not reward spouses for contributing absolutely nothing financially. We have an extremely strong position. I expect she'll sign the settlement once she understands she won't get anything more." Sure enough, a week later, she signed, Pierce told me. Just like that. 7 years of marriage ended faster than the time it took her to pack for that beach trip. But the universe wasn't done yet. He didn't just lose the marriage. He lost the fantasy too. It happened on a random Friday evening at the grocery store. I was reaching for a carton of strawberries when someone tried to speed walk past me. Natalie, the coworker who was supposed to go on the trip. I called her name. She froze. Guilt stops people the same way headlights freeze animals on the road. "I shouldn't talk about this," she whispered. "That's a no," I replied calmly. She exhaled shakily, then dropped the truth. "I wasn't on the trip. It was just them." There it was, the sentence that confirmed everything he'd tried to deny. But then she added something I didn't expect. "They're not together anymore." I blinked. "What?" "Trevor, sorry, Dan, ended it. Said it wasn't what he thought." "Meaning?" Natalie gave a sad smile. "Meaning he liked the attention, not the actual responsibility of being with her." I nodded slowly. "Of course. He didn't leave me for her. He left our marriage because she made him feel shiny, desired, admired." When real life followed him into their fantasy, he ran. That's who he was. And I suddenly understood something cherished and painful. I didn't lose to another woman. I freed myself from a man who was always half committed to everything but himself. 2 days later, I got an email. No subject line, just please read. It was from him. Pages of desperation. He wrote about nostalgia, about memories, about the good years, about how he wasn't thinking clearly, about how he wanted another chance. But you know what he didn't mention? The cheating, the lies, the disrespect, the trip, the 6 months he emotionally abandoned me. Every line was I miss you, not I'm sorry. Every paragraph was remember what we had, not I understand what I did. I forwarded the message to Pierce. His response came back immediately. Do not reply. Classic manipulation. Stay strong. And I did. For the first time in months, I did. The court date was simple. 10 minutes. Signatures. Stamps. A judge who barely looked up from the paperwork. When I walked out of that courtroom, Jordan was waiting. Well, he asked. It's done. He studied my face. So, how does it feel? I thought about it, then smiled. Like I should have done it 6 months ago. We grabbed lunch afterward. I laughed. A real laugh. Unforced, unbroken, unshadowed. I hadn't realized how long it had been since laughter didn't feel like trying to push air through a cracked ribcage. Months passed. One afternoon at the hardware store, I saw him across the parking lot. He looked deflated, thinner, tired, older in a way grief can't fully explain. When he spotted me, he froze. Then he looked away, quickly, as if ashamed, as if afraid, as if the ghost of the life he ruined had just walked into the sunlight. I felt nothing. No hate, no anger, no longing, no satisfaction. Just nothing. And that's when I knew. Healing had arrived quietly, without asking for applause. That same week, Jordan mentioned something casually. He tried getting back with her, Jordan said. She said no. Apparently he's not her type now that he's single. I nodded. Of course she said no. She wanted excitement. She wanted a man who wanted her because she wasn't his wife. She didn't want the man who threw away a 7-year marriage and came crawling back with nothing left but regrets. I felt no pity for him, only clarity. His consequences were finally his. 6 months after the divorce, I said yes to grabbing coffee with someone from work. It was simple, easy, light. No pressure, no tension. Just 2 adults talking. And as I drove home afterward, something warm spread through me. Something I hadn't felt in more than a year. Happiness. Real happiness. Not the fragile kind that depends on someone else choosing me, but the kind that comes from choosing myself. And that is when I understood. The best thing he ever did for me was tell me to get a divorce. Because I finally did. And my life began again. If someone had told me a year ago that I would end my marriage, that I would pack his things into boxes, that I would file for divorce without hesitation, that I would walk into a courtroom alone and walk out lighter, I would have laughed, or cried, or denied it completely. Because back then, I believed marriage meant endurance, that love meant sacrifice, that loyalty meant forgiving until you had nothing left to offer. But healing has a strange way of arriving quietly, slow as dawn, soft as new light, spreading through a dark room. You don't notice it at first. Then suddenly, one day, you look at yourself in the mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back. Not because she's broken, but because she's whole again. For months after the divorce, bits and pieces of my old life floated back to me. A coworker whispered that he looked lost. Jordan said he wasn't doing well at work anymore. A friend from mutual circles said he regretted everything. And someone else mentioned he'd tried dating again, but nothing stuck. His choices had finally circled back to him. But none of that belonged to me anymore. His consequences were no longer my burden. His loneliness was no longer my responsibility. His guilt was no longer my problem. I had given enough, more than enough. And now the only person I was responsible for was myself. Healing doesn't arrive as fireworks. It arrives as small victories. The first night I slept through, fully. The first morning I woke up without my stomach hurting. The first weekend I enjoyed without wondering where he was or who he was with. The first laugh that didn't feel like it was scraped out of me. The first time I looked around my house, and felt peace rather than emptiness. Little by little, I returned to myself, the version of me before all the excuses, before all the emotional negotiations, before love became something I had to earn instead of something I deserved. And then one day, I realized something profound. I wasn't healing from him. I was healing from who I had forced myself to become just to keep him. The coffee date with the coworker wasn't a love story. Not yet, maybe never. But it didn't need to be. It was a reminder that connection didn't have to hurt, that conversation didn't have to feel like walking through a minefield. That being seen by someone didn't require losing parts of myself to be palatable. It reminded me that my future wasn't defined by my past, and that companionship, when it arrives honestly, doesn't ask you to shrink. It invites you to expand. People think betrayal breaks you, but that's not true. Betrayal reveals you. It shows you who you became while trying to hold on to someone who had already let go. It shows you who you were before the erosion began, and most importantly, it shows you who you can become once you stop clinging to what was never meant to stay. My husband told me, "If you don't like my choices, then you should get a divorce." For months, I thought those words were a threat, a dismissal, a punishment. I didn't realize until later that they were a door he never expected me to walk through. When I closed that door behind me, I didn't just end a marriage. I ended the version of myself who tolerated so little love and called it enough. And I began something new. A life where my worth wasn't up for negotiation. A life where my home was finally peaceful. A life where I wasn't waiting for someone else to choose me. Because I had finally chosen myself. If you're watching this and you're standing in that uncertain space, knowing someone no longer treats you the way you deserve, but afraid of what life looks like after you let go, hear me. You are stronger than the storm you're in. You are braver than the silence you're enduring. And you are allowed to choose yourself, even when someone else thinks you won't. My marriage didn't end the day he left for that trip. It ended the day I realized staying was a slow form of disappearing. Leaving wasn't weakness, it was rebirth. And the woman I am now, steady, clear, whole, she was waiting for me on the other side of that choice. This isn't a story about losing a husband. It's a story about finding myself.